I felt completely alone and isolated in my experience. And that's what happens when you wear a mask for too long.
She made her private journals public and shattered the image of her picture-perfect family.
This was my Hail Mary attempt to find one person. I'm like, let me just get one person who understands me.
Now writer, speaker, and activist Stephanie Hanrahan is stepping off of the page and onto intentional living with Courtney Meyers.
I don't want my writing to comfort you. I want it to make you so uncomfortable that you're forced to change or at least ask questions.
Talking about the power of vulnerability.
Some people will not receive your truth because they are not ready to face their own.
And the beautiful brevity of life.
I understand that all of this can be taken from me. And so that sounds scary, but there's so much beauty in that. And that's where I found the most hope.
On an all-new Intentional Living with Courtney Meyers. Welcome to Intentional Living with Courtney Meyers, a podcast dedicated to those seeking a more fulfilled and purposeful life through thought-provoking conversation, spiritual exploration, and authentic connections. The intentional movement has begun, and if you found yourself here, you are a part of it. Intentional Living with Courtney Meyers starts now. Hi, Stephanie. Welcome to the show. Welcome to Intentional Living with Courtney Meyers. I'm really honored to get this time with you. I know you're fresh off of a little break and ready to jump back into the working world and talk about all the things motherhood and storytelling and everything you have going on in your seemingly perfect world. And I would love to jump in there with your story and this whole concept of perfectionism, which I think is a big problem today.
Yes, thank you for having me, Courtney. I'm really excited for this conversation because anytime I can use my voice and my story to amplify other people's voices and stories, then I feel like I'm fulfilling and walking in my purpose and mission. So thank you for giving me this platform. It's interesting when you say tell your story. It's hard to know where to start. I always say I have a very colorful story, which is just a very nice way of saying there has been a lot of trial overcome, pretty much from the get-go. And I'm an open book about it all. So I've dealt with abuse, anxiety, infertility. I've had cancer twice. And that was all even before meeting my husband and having our children. And once that happened, I kind of felt like, okay, I've put in my time, right? I've done enough of the hard things in life, and now I can just coast into this fairy tale future. And that was not the way that things ended up being for our family. Very shortly after we had our second child, I found my husband, who is former athlete, really just kind of this epitome of physical health. Never would have suspected to find him unresponsive on our bedroom floor with a failing heart. Unbeknownst to us, he has a really rare and incurable heart condition. So he flatlined that day, 6 weeks after I had our second baby.
Oh my goodness.
That was a very complicated layer that we did not see coming. And the only reason I'm not a widow today is during his flatline, he was getting out of bed and he hit our nightstand and broke his back. And that jolt of breaking his spine restarted his heart. So if he would have fallen gracefully to the carpet, I would be a widow right now. So that was another layer to a story, a colorful story. And right around that time, as I'm trying to learn my way around heart disease and kind of care for him, who was our caretaker, our steady, constant, father and husband figure, I began noticing our 2-year-old daughter presenting with some signs of autism, and very shortly thereafter, our son as well. So I am myself very passionate about telling the story no one can see, because you can't see those things in a photo. And at first glance, our family appears to have this personification of perfection. And while I think we're perfect and beautiful, we're also flawed. And so that is the story that I love to share.
I mean, so many things. You have experienced so much. And I love how you say, okay, you meet your husband and you're building your future together. I've already gone through all the things, but isn't it true? It's like you never actually go through all the things in life. It's just like there's always going to be something on some certain level. Not everyone is going to deal with cancer or infertility or the health issues that you're dealing with your family, but everyone has something. Like we all have a story and we don't share it. Like what is it about society that we want to like show that we are just so perfect, do you think?
Yeah, I think it's a protective mechanism. At least that's what I was using it as for so long. I felt like, okay, if I will be admired and respected and revered for being perfect. And that's actually what I've come to find out from my field research is the exact opposite. It kind of acts as a repellent. It keeps people out.
Yeah.
If they don't know the true you, you're not going to know the true them. And then you are going to stay in these surface level relationships your entire life. And I think humans at our core crave that connection. And the only way I've been able to experience that is through vulnerability and through trusting the right people with my story. I think it's important to not give a blanket statement of like, we have to be vulnerable with everybody. I think there's people that are deserving of our truths more so than others. But I certainly don't walk into Chick-fil-A and I'm like, hi, I'm Stephanie and I have depression, right? And those people that I feel like I can break down the barriers slowly and reveal those layers to myself, I've ended up having even if we don't have shared experiences, we have universal feelings, and that ends up connecting us more as humans.
But even so, I mean, I think we get so caught up in this story that we tell of ourselves outwardly that we sometimes even lose sight of who we are inside. Like, how do you actually like embrace all that hurt or vulnerability or even the good things? Like, how do we actually learn to accept those parts of ourselves so that we're comfortable enough to share them? Because I think sometimes we kid ourselves thinking we're telling our story or being vulnerable or showing ourselves, and we're still playing that facade. We're still playing that story out. Just we're creating it in our real life.
Totally. So I think there's canned vulnerability. So even
Hmm.
now, I've gotten more comfortable telling my truth online and in-person relationships. However, it's very easy for me to stick to the script. I was the girl that was abused, and then I overcame that, right? But true vulnerability in the moment is that step deeper. Where am I now? When you ask me, how am I today? Am I going to give you the canned answer of, I'm fine, I'm good? Or am I going to say, you know what, I'm really struggling with how my body feels and looks. And, I had a disagreement with my husband that left me very unsettled, or whatever it is that you're dealing with in that present moment. That goes off script because it's ever changing. And I think that's where true vulnerability and negating that perfectionism can be found is even going off script from your canned vulnerable moments. It's very easy to rely on those.
I mean, it's even though I think easier sometimes with strangers to go into that real vulnerability space because it's not like we have to see them again, to really honor that true us inside and tell that story like, oh, I had a fight with my husband today, or I'm just not feeling real. I'm not feeling these jeans. I'm not feeling confident in myself. It's harder almost sometimes when you have those certain relationships in your life that don't allow you to do that. Why don't, like, how do we do open up in that vulnerable way to the people that are closer to us where that really actually should maybe be the easier side?
I wonder if that has something, and I'm spitballing here, but I wonder if that has
Hmm.
something to do with being worried about response.
Mm,
And so it is one thing for me to go online and put up a post for 100,000 plus people that
yeah.
comment, but that I don't really know or personally care about. I care about them, I care
Mhm.
about my community, but
Right.
I'm not sitting around the Thanksgiving table with them. I'm not having to see them the next day at carpool. And so even if they say things that are hurtful or hateful to me, or hard, even worse, hard for me to hear, truths that are hard for me to hear, I don't have to see them in my present life. And I think it's different when you have one-on-one relationships with people. If I share something with you that's hard, in particular, if it's something about our relationship, then I
Hmm.
have to worry about your response. I have to be responsible in a way for your response, meaning that I don't know what it's going to be, and I have to be okay with that. And I think for me and anyone who has that Enneagram 1 type A controlled personality, I'm really good at managing myself, but I have to let go and Go, what? I can't manage other people? I mean, that's a tall task. And so I think that's where it's more difficult for me. I could stand on a stage and say absolutely everything, but I'm talking at you, not to you. It's different when you're one-on-one with someone.
Isn't that funny how, I mean, I've always been like, I can handle it all. Just give it to me. I can take it. But then I worry so much about how someone else is going to feel or think. And that's where that, like, that people pleaser thing comes in, which I think people pleasing, perfectionism, control, all these things we are talking about. I actually seem to talk to a lot of women that deal with these issues. We're all being drawn together, I think. And I don't know if it's just because it's such a big issue among women or women of our generation, or if it's just the people that are coming into this circle on this and on the show and sharing their truths. But like, it seems to be an issue.
Yes, and I think so. One of the things, thankfully, I'm a reformed people pleaser, so I'm almost on the displeasing side because I would rather be disappointing someone else than disappointing myself, and that has taken a lot of work and a lot of therapy and a lot of personal push because that's not my tendency. It's easier to forego your own needs for the sake of others, but that has never served me well. And so the thing that I would challenge listeners on as far as the people pleasing and not setting boundaries because we want to make sure others like us or approve of us is really to ask yourself, what is harder for you to handle? The risk of maybe a little external conflict or the internal conflict that you will 100% have if you deny your truest self and your needs and your boundaries. And for me, I would 100% rather risk having a hard conversation with a friend that maybe doesn't go well and the outcome isn't what I anticipated than have to swallow it, stomach it, and then guess what? Build resentment. Because that's exactly what it's going to do. Every time I say a yes, that should have been a no. Every time that I have this knowing inside of me and I deny it for the sake of someone else, I'm building a little bit of like internal conflict and resentment, and I'm stewing and I'm talking to my friend about it. And I'm like, I can't believe this person. And that is pushing us further apart versus coming to them with kindness and sincerity and saying, hey, brace yourself. I'm about to bring you something hard, but I think there's a chance it could better our relationship. And the truth is, the hard truth is, I've done that and it hasn't been received well. It's not a guarantee that people are going to be like, oh, I hear you and I see you and I agree. No, you could risk that there's a little tension and conflict, but that's okay. I would rather displease someone else than displease myself.
How did you get there? Because that is a hard task when you're living your life avoiding conflict or avoiding saying your truth. A lot of times, you say you're on the recovery side of the people pleasing. A lot of times when you're in that people pleasing and perfectionist mode, you are willing to sit with yourself and your discomfort over risking the discomfort of someone else. So, I mean, you said therapy. What are other tools like that you can use for that? Because it is not, I think it's almost easier said than done. Like, oh, I would rather feel good about myself. Like if you are in it, that's not where your mind goes.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's learned behavior over time. I don't think I have a
Mhm.
lightning bolt moment that shifted me from one perspective to another. I will say that for somebody who suffers with their mental health and anxiety, it worsens that for me. And so why would I take something, eat something, say something, do something that makes my health more of a risk? And so I think if we started looking at it that way, because I would just stew and perseverate and I think, oh, I could have said this and I should have said that. And it could even be simple things like, I didn't want to bake the cookies for the bake sale. Why did I say, yeah, I have no time for this nonsense, but here I am mixing the batter, right? And so those kind of things, I think just chipped away at me over time where I'm like, ooh, I can say no. And no is a complete sentence. It's one of my favorite quotes. I owe nobody any explanation or justification except myself. I am the one I have to sit with at the end of the day. And so if I'm sitting with myself all day and my mind is racing of all the couldas and wouldas and shouldas, then I have made a misstep. So I'm just going to try something different. And most of the time, I mean, if you're saying it with love and kindness, the no is okay. And it actually gives permission for other people to do the same.
I love that. I mean, I definitely personally struggle with that saying no. And then, the ruminating thoughts and the constant thinking of like what I'm saying or what I'm doing. Or then you say yes and you don't really want to. And then you're carrying all this energy about you that is not serving anyone. And even when it comes to saying no, I find there's a lot of times where there's like the oversharing and the anxiety that comes with it. So I say no, and then I want to explain why or give all this information where, like you're saying, and I've heard that quote before, no is a complete sentence. That takes a lot of courage to just say no. I feel like I'm talking about like drug dare programs growing up in school. Just say no. But like that's what essentially you're saying is we need to get comfortable with this concept of like just say no.
Yeah. I mean, look, the boundaries are only a problem for the people who benefited from you having none.
Mm,
So when you say no to the right people with the right intent and no explanation necessary, the
mhm.
right people will receive that. Now, the people who benefited from you having no boundaries and being the queen of the bake sale, they're not going to like it. They're going to maybe give you a little pushback. And I think that's the thing when I read about boundaries and study them and learn, it's that it's not as exactly the setting of the boundary that is hard for people to do. It's the follow through when there's the
Yes.
aftermath, when there's the response afterwards. And so that goes back to even the way I approach my writing. If I can stand in my truth, if I can do that gut check and I'm like, this is what works right for me, this is what I believe. And so if I can put that on paper or it comes out of my mouth in a personal relationship with
Mhm.
somebody, then I have to be prepared that I am here to release my truth, not manage a response. And
Mm.
so it is not my responsibility. I'm not the judge and jury for someone else's response. But if I've said it with love and I've done the gut check that I know that this is true for me in this moment, then I've done my job.
Mm. I love that. I love it comes back to a lesson that I've learned is like mind your business. It's just like how someone's going to react or what they're going to think or what they're going to say is actually none of our business. It's just like come back to yourself and understand that you are standing in your own truth. But let's talk about your writing because I mean, that is what started this whole thing for you. I know you've had all the your story, but you wrote about it and then you found the courage to share it, which I think is one of the biggest things we can do is to connect with others is by doing that, writing our story or sharing it. And even if you don't want to open up your journals to the world like you did, um, journaling is huge to allow you to work through these thoughts, to work through your mental state or whatever, set boundaries, learn about yourself. But how did you find the courage to open that up to the world?
Mm. Well, it was really because I felt completely alone and isolated in my experience. And that's what happens when you wear a mask for too long. And so I had all these things that had happened to me in life, all these things that were happening with my children. My babies were young when I started Tinkles Her Pants. So I think my daughter was 4 or 5 and she's 9 now. So I've been doing it 4 or 5 years. And so I remember thinking to myself, it was shortly after her diagnosis, actually the day of, if I'm remembering correctly. And I just felt I didn't know a single other person who had a child with autism, but I knew statistically I had to. I had a certain, couple hundred friends on
Mhm.
Facebook. So I'm like, there's other people out there that are walking through these same things, whether it's the things I've experienced, what I'm going through with my children, my husband. But nobody was talking about it. So I just followed suit and did the same. And so the day she was diagnosed, I went home. I searched for a paper journal. I'd always journaled, but couldn't find one in the house. And so I just started an empty Instagram. I knew Instagram was up and coming. I didn't have an account at the time. And I didn't want one. I didn't want friends. I didn't want followers. I just wanted a space to be able to write and release my truth. So I figure, okay, this will be my journal. You always have your phone with you. And so if you scroll back, the very first post is diagnosis day. And I just have these dark circles under my eyes from crying so much. And she's just happy as can be, knowing no different. And I began for 2 years writing my truth only to myself. So what you're saying about not having to do it for the public, but doing it for personal reasons is
Mm-hmm.
very valid, because for 2 years it was me and that empty Instagram. And I journaled and I journaled. And then one day I had this public account still with my friends and family, and I just felt so icky. I was posting our family photos, those really, curated, beautiful posed
Yeah.
family photos. And, the comments that you always get, oh, your family's so beautiful. You're so perfect. And it was just that word perfection that just gutted me. And I'm like,
Mhm.
oh, I know I am feeling so icky. It's because now I have practice at being my truest self. And so this doesn't feel right. The admiration is falling short from the knowing, from somebody really knowing me. And so I was bold. I made that private journal public, that private Instagram account public. And I wrote an article called A Peek Behind the Picket Fence, and kind of just shared what you can't see in our family photos. And that went viral. And to my surprise, this was my Hail Mary attempt to find one person. I'm like, let me just get one person who understands me. And to my surprise, thousands have resonated with our story. And so now every day I get to just spend my time personally and professionally writing my truth. And it's very cathartic and freeing. And I would encourage anybody to do the same, if not for the masses, for yourself.
What was the response though for those closest to you?
Ah, so it was mixed. I'm very thankful to have a husband who doesn't, he just sees how, you stand on the shoulders of people before you, and he knows how much authors and educators have helped me. So he was super
Mhm.
encouraging, but it has been hard because my story is intertwined with other people's. So if I'm
Mhm.
telling mine, I'm telling part of theirs. And I think it's safer for some people to keep you masked.
Yeah.
And so it has been a mixed bag. But again, that goes back to my gut check about, is this my story? Yes. Is it my truth? Yes. Am I saying it with kindness and love? Yes. And
Mhm.
then that's my barometer for how much I'll share. But you have to be prepared that some people will not receive your truth because they are not ready to face their own.
Yeah. I mean, and that's the biggest thing about like what this platform is for us to really learn to own our truth and find our truth and go within, because we do live such curated lives. I mean, between social media, but take social media away. I mean, in our life, I think we curate everything. We were just speaking about that. We try and make that imperfect perfect. It's like you want to show yourself, you think, oh, I need to show who I truly am. And when you do it on a public level, you actually curate your imperfect moments. Like
Mhm.
it's
Yes,
kind of like
yes, absolutely.
counterproductive, right?
Sure. Yeah, I call them, sometimes my friend and I were talking about this, are they like manufactured moments or manufactured
Yeah.
memory? Because sometimes I don't always have my phone out, but then I'm like, well, I want to tell a story about that. So then I have to have an image for it, right? I'm an author and an illustrator on social
Hmm.
media. So now I have to kind of like recreate this in a way. But that's where I always go back to. I've always said I love pretty pictures, but I like the story behind them even more. So if you scroll my feed, yeah, it's bright and sunny and beautiful. And then I really want people to hone in on the words, the messaging, because
Hmm.
that's where I have always felt the most comfortable, not concealing my cracks and just being my truest self. But you're absolutely right. I think that goes back to the canned vulnerability. What are we comfortable sharing? Here's my canned amount of flaws that I'm willing to put up in online for you to look at. And so that's a slippery slope too.
I mean, we have to, I think there is a balance that needs to be found between what we are, like you said, what we are willing to share, where we are willing to get vulnerable, and what we do keep for ourselves. And that's a tricky slope because, especially like for you, you're sharing your children. I sometimes share my children and I sometimes don't. I have very mixed feelings about that. I want to, and then I feel bad. So it's like, how how do you tell your story? Because we are not on an island. Telling our story requires shedding light on other people, and that might not even be their truth. Like, we could tell a story that where we are interacting with someone else and they may be experiencing it on a completely different level. We're all like writing our own narrative as we go through our world. So like, it's such a hard navigation of being who you are and sharing your truth while weaving in the truth of others and their experience.
Absolutely. I just recently did a reel on this because I feel like how much of my children's story is mine to share. And as
Mm-hmm.
they, when they're tiny, you feel like, oh, like preschoolers don't have any autonomy. Like it's very easy to look at them and just think like, not understand the impact of speaking for them. And now
Mm-hmm.
I do. I mean, my kids are 7 and 9. They understand to a child's capacity what I do for a living. They're
Mm-hmm.
very aware of advocacy and have chosen right now to self-advocate for themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And if they said to me tomorrow, take it all away, it would be gone. But I think it is hard because for autism in particular, I always look at, um, my response to people saying, should you, share your children's story or not,
Yeah.
is that, if my husband and I raise them right, there won't be a single hair on their head that they want hidden. And autism to us is something that we embrace. It's an intricate part of who they are. It's like saying, does your child have blue eyes or brown? Do they have
Mm-hmm.
diabetes? They are autistic and they're beautifully, wholly, wonderfully made. And if we don't put a different face and name with neurodiversity, then we're still going to get the outdated stigmas that social media and the media in general has given us for decades. And so it's very important that people see this side of the spectrum too,
Mm-hmm.
and that it's not a negative. And I think that people asking me to hide or not talk about autism still view it as something problematic, and we do not in our family and on our feed. So it's always a fine line for me. I will never post anything derogatory or that compromises their dignity. We always use it as teachable moments, and to normalize, to let people know, again, you are not alone. And so that is a craft that I'm still learning. And again, it will ebb and flow as they reach those teenage years. That may not be something that they want to talk about publicly, but my hope is that they will remain affirmed. This is a part of who they are that we validate and support.
Well, I mean, speaking of autism, like, how did you take that diagnosis? Because in a way, going back to the whole concept of perfectionism or creating that mask or wearing that mask, we can do everything in our power to curate our life or control it. But you were faced with something completely out of your control, a huge shift in your life. And it's almost like a death or a mourning of what you were trying to create to really what is. And so, how did you navigate that? Because I don't care if it's you finding out your child has autism or like your husband has, his heart condition. It can be anything in your life. Your spouse is cheating on you, you lose your job, whatever it is that you have as your life in your box, in your little facade, can be shattered. And how do you overcome that and step into it and mourn what you once thought was your perfect little happiness?
Yeah, it's what you just said. You have to mourn it. You have to grieve
Mhm.
it. I mean, if you scroll back to those beginning posts on my page, there is a woman who is in deep, deep grief. And I want to be clear that I'm not grieving my child. I'm grieving the idea I had in my head. I
Right.
had this idea for my life that was never promised to me. I just thought it was. I had this idea of what a mother
Mhm.
daughter relationship would look like. I had the idea of what kind of parent I would be. The only perfect child is the one we have in our head. And we all know that, whether you have a diagnosis or not. We all learn that as we become parents. But I had to go through a really deep demolition and rebuild stage of my faith and family. What does it look like now? And I did not do it gracefully. This was not a perfect moment for me. And it still isn't. There's still times I wake up and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, like it's so much easier for other people. Again, with
Mhm.
comparative suffering. Yes, we all
Mhm.
go through things, but my goodness, haven't I had enough? And it's just, you go into those loops. And I think that's natural. And the last thing you need when you're grieving is shame. So I would encourage anybody who is living a life that's unexpected to at least take the shame out of it, that you are entitled to feel that way. I think for me, it was just not getting stuck in it and then really reframing my brain about what wins, what milestones, what miracles really look like. Our family will never probably be affirmed as good and perfect by the standards of the world, but we are perfect in our eyes, in our image, and in our family. So it's just relearning those things. The things that I'm just stand in awe of my children have nothing to do with, getting the best grades or kicking the most goals, or it's just not. We have a different measure of success. And I found it to be more intimate and beautiful, but I had to reframe my brain to see those things. And that takes time, years.
Well, I mean, I love, excuse me, I love two of the things you said there. Reframe what miracles look like and reaffirm your faith, which are two, I think, really big things, especially when it comes to owning who you are, understanding your truth, understanding what's really happening in your life and stepping into it in an empowerment way is that you have to realize there is something bigger at work and there are miracles in every day. They may not be these, like you said, that what everyone else sees as miracles, but reframing it for you. And it's the little things that matter. And it sounds like those were two extremely big points for you to step into this.
Yeah, absolutely. I think those, I'm a storyteller. So finding the
Yes.
story in every day
Mhm.
helps. Being able to write that down and then reference it. So I have precedent, like, oh, yeah, 2 years ago, we were going through a really hard time. We saw some regression in the kids. We saw some regression with my mental health. And now we were able to get through that. So I think I can do that again. So just finding those touch points of beauty and miracles. There's a beautiful quote that says, the beautiful and the terrible together are the only way that I've noticed the blessings. And I think that reigns true for a lot of us, certainly myself, which is the beautiful right next to that terrible
Yeah.
is how I've been the most blessed. And so one would not occur without the other. And I am not negligent to think that I am done being challenged. But I know that if I am, on the other side of that is beauty and love too. I just have to be awake enough to see it.
I love that. I love the whole concept that you write down your story of your day because if we can take all those little moments of our day, it makes the bigger picture, it makes the bigger story. And even the good, the bad, the ugly, all of us embracing our whole self, embracing our whole story, embracing our whole truth, the whole narrative allows us to see that bigger picture of like where it's leading us because we don't know what the future holds. That's where I think we can really get into the conversation of mental health is a lot of the issues with mental health, I think, is either living in our past or our future. And I mean, I know I deal with anxiety and depression and on medication and gone through therapy just like you. So I understand that concept of it. And it's something I struggle with on a daily basis. But learning to come back into that present moment and like writing it down in the moment so that you can take stock out of, what your day looks like because we can get so lost in the one little bad thing in the day. Like I dropped coffee on my couch and ruined my couch and now my day's ruined, where it's like, let's look at the bigger picture. Let's look at the full story of the day, what really happened. And then we can like move forward in life in such a more beautiful with a much more beautiful story that's all over the place because you can't have a story that's just all rainbows and sunshine.
Yeah, and I think also what we teach our kids with complex emotions is that you can feel two things at once. So I think where we misstep is thinking, oh my gosh, I can't be upset about the coffee on the sofa when there's kids that are starving and there's this going on with my friends
Yes.
and, and yes, you can. I mean, you
Mhm.
can be upset about something, your upholstery getting ruined, and you can be grateful too that you are alive and have a beating heart. And so one doesn't negate the other. I think it's which ones you get stuck in. And so if you're perseverating and stuck on that for too long, then that can spiral into a whole bunch of other issues with your internal relationships and external. But I think that's where the shame component is so big for me. Like, I'm
Mm.
allowed to feel upset. I'm allowed to cry. People are like, don't cry, don't cry. Oh my goodness, when women apologize for crying, I'm so sorry, I'm crying. Please do. Please express those emotions that you're feeling, because this is part of the problem that systemically we've been taught to be like quiet and kind and happy, and that happiness is just the ultimate end goal. And I don't think that anymore. Autism has taught
Mm.
me happiness is not my end goal, humanness is. I want my
Mm.
kids to be able to feel such a wide range of emotions and feel comfortable enough to express those to me. And that is the sign of a positive parental relationship in my eyes, or any relationship.
Well, you just said something that keeps coming up from so many different women, and it's only the women I'm speaking with. It's not the men. It's this whole concept of, quiet, be good. I mean, it's like every single person somehow brings it up in the conversation. I don't know why. It's not like we intend to go there, but this is obviously a thing that we are struggling with. Be quiet, be good. Don't show your emotions. Just do what you're supposed to do. Like, where did we get that messaging?
Oh gosh, that's a lot to unpack. I think that's in media, in marketing, in history, in all women's studies, and in our everyday life. I think that there is a message that it is safer for a woman to be sweet, kind, quiet, polite.
Mhm.
Goes back to the people pleasing, right? Don't displease other people. Be
Mhm.
nice, be kind.
Mhm.
We don't hear the message, be honest, be strong, be bold,
Yeah.
speak your truth, and just be prepared that there's consequences for that, right? And I think we're starting to. I think I'm paying attention to this next generation that
Yeah.
feels a little bit more free to speak on who and what they really are. And I think that's inspiring to me. But that's certainly the message I got, is people want you small and quiet and kind, and don't disrupt, don't take up too much space. And that is particularly the work I'm doing with my daughter to make sure that she doesn't get that message, but also for my son, because he is a male with privilege in this country. And I think it's important that he hears how he can support women, and negating that message too, because it seems to be universal. You're correct in that. Everyone I talk to as well feels about the same.
Well, and like, so why are we railing? Like, why do you think now? Why do you think we're standing up and being like, no, we're done with this? I mean, why are we having these conversations? Like, what is changing to be like, no, we're not going to do that anymore?
I think there's a Brene Brown video that's gone viral in the last few months. And she says, and I won't speak for you, but for myself, I'm approaching 40. And so she's like, you're halfway to dead. And so the armor that you put up to protect yourself, people are like, no more. That doesn't work for
Mhm.
me. It's keeping my people out. It's keeping connection out. It's making me a worse parent. Like, these things that I put on to protect myself are actually, and this circles back to what we were talking about earlier, are
Mhm.
actually disengaging me from people in society. And so I think that's our equivalent of a midlife crisis right now. And I think, as bad as the internet can be, there is a consciousness that we have now. I was thinking about this the other day, about how I was raised in a really, really small town. Everyone looked like me, everyone talked like me, everyone was exactly the same, copy and paste. And so what that means is, this is before the internet. I'm a dinosaur here. So before the smartphones and the internet. So you only believed what you were exposed to. You didn't know there was another way unless you found a book in the library that told you otherwise. And so, as bad as the internet and social media can be, we have a generation of people, including ourselves, that are now like, oh, if I feel alone in my anxiety, I can put in a hashtag and find 1,000 other people now to validate my experience. Or if I'm having questions about a religion that doesn't feel right to me, that I was taught, I can go research online and find different options that feel more right and true. That is so huge. And I think it's raising this consciousness in a lot of our generation
Mm.
where they're like, wait a minute, maybe what I was taught to believe it wasn't exactly what feels right to me now as I'm nearing this last chapter of my life.
Yeah. I mean, and I've heard a lot and I've spoken a lot about it. And in different career, in my past career, I was working on a television show, and all the women were excited to, it was a round table of women speaking the real, and they were all talking about how excited they were to reach 40. And because they can just be, themselves, and they felt more free to be themselves. And I'm 41, so I've passed that. I'm still struggling a little bit with it, but there is something about it that, you can feel like, I think I heard Katherine Heigl saying that she was happy to get older because she didn't have to play the pretty girl, the nice girl. She got to like be a more multifaceted character in her acting because she wasn't just looked at as this perfect little princess girl, whatever it was that she was being cast as. And as we get older, we have that ability to kind of stand in our truth a little bit more. But standing in our truth means we also have to unlearn all that masking that we've done for 40 plus years.
Yes, that's the hard part. And that's the part you have to be willing to take the hits on the chin when they come, because it's that's the part we were referencing earlier, the making people uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
And the truth is the status quo doesn't change. People don't change until it becomes so uncomfortable that they're forced to. And so that's
Yes.
always what I hope at the end of the day, what my writing has done is challenged people to look at things with a new set of eyes. I don't want my writing to comfort you. I want it to make you so uncomfortable that you're forced to change or at least ask questions, right, within yourself. And so I agree with Catherine. I think there is a freedom that comes in that last half of life. Like we kind of look at like the senior generation that like grandma gets to say whatever she wants at the Thanksgiving table and oh, it's grandma. But like, why can't that apply to us? And that is another gift of autism is my children don't mask, they don't lie, they don't have the capacity to play the social game. And
Yeah.
so it kind of has given me the permission to do the same where I'm like, wait a minute, how cool is it that they can just say, I don't like the yams, no thank you. And so that's a trivial example, but it's so freeing to be able to do that and to know that the right people will stay in your life and respect you more for it.
Well, that's probably why, they came in as your children, because I know I've said this time and time again, our children are our best teachers. And maybe that was a lesson that you needed to learn, is like that, to be able to be unfiltered, because with their diagnosis, that is part of it. They have no filter, and how freeing and wonderful in a way. I mean, what a blessing to go through life and not to have that filter, in a way that you can just be you and say what you feel like. And I love, well, not love, but I think there's a lot of truth in what you were saying, as getting uncomfortable allows you to finally make that change. And maybe that's what's happening as we're reaching our 40s. We're just uncomfortable in ourselves, and we're ready to just be like, but I want to just be me, because there has to be something that pushes us to do it. Why would we change if everything is just going perfectly?
Yeah. And why would you change if the people around you aren't? So that's another thing. I
Hmm.
talk a lot about like the pack mentality. I see a lot
Yeah.
in the city that I live where the women dress the same and they go to do the same things.
Hmm.
And that's fine if that serves you. But if you, it's sometimes good to be the disruptor. It's good to be the domino to fall and see who follows with you and falls with you, because nothing changes if everything stays the same.
Yeah.
But is it easier and more comfortable to follow the status quo? Sure. And that just goes back to what are you motivated by? There's people
Hmm.
like you and I that are really motivated by the idea of growing and gaining, and we
Yeah.
feel that uncomfortability within ourselves, and that pushes us enough to want to go to the next level of consciousness or understanding or education or have these deep conversations. If you're listening to this, then you probably are one of those people too. So
Probably.
it's good to find the people like that, but it's also good then to take what you learned back into those spaces that need to be disrupted. And
Yeah.
just know not everyone's going to agree with you, but it's good to plant the seeds. Plant the seeds.
But you might be giving someone else the permission to take that path that they were feeling uncomfortable with. I mean, I think if we're not growing, if we're not learning, if we're not taking those steps, are we really living? Because the point of life isn't just to be stagnant and have just this little packaged life. I mean, we need to experience it all. I truly believe that. It's taken me a long time to get there, but I think we do need to continuously grow.
Oh yeah.
Otherwise, that it becomes boring, and boring is just akin to like not living.
Well, and I think when you've gone through any sort of intense challenge, I
Hmm.
think what has happened with my children and my husband in particular, knowing he is not out of the woods yet, knowing that there is a chance the next time it stops, his heart's already stopped through 3 times total,
Oh my goodness.
but it may not be in a safe place. What if he's behind the wheel of the car and I lose my family in a matter of minutes? And so that brevity makes me realize how much I value and love this life. And it's only when I focus on that how short this all is. Everyone says that life's so short, but do we really think about that? It is sand in our hands, all of this. And so when I think it's easier to be distracted by the t-ball games and,
Yes.
the shopping and the all of the things that keep us from really realizing the brevity of this life.
Mhm.
But it's when we think about those things that we realize how precious it all really is. And so I don't live every moment being like, YOLO, I'm going to seize the moment. Like, I'm not sending any false messages here to people. I'm just seizing every moment. I still get angry and feel like the whole spectrum of emotions in a matter of minutes. But I understand that all of this can be taken from me. And so that sounds scary, but there's so much beauty in that. And that's where I found the most hope. So I'd encourage people to just shift that lens, right? When circumstances don't change, perspective can. That's what we can control.
I don't know how you do it. And I'm not even saying that because it's like, it sounds like a nice thing to say, but that is scary to live every moment like you don't know what's going to happen. But if you actually look at your life, if anyone turns that angle, none of us really do. You have a diagnosis that you are working with that you're like, okay, brings it more forefront for us. But any of us can walk out that door and it could be our last moment. So we do need to take that perspective a little bit more. But yes, it's not like all Susie Sunshine, YOLO, everything's wonderful. Let's just carpe diem. But that does give you such an interesting perspective, and hopefully that we can all bring a little bit of that into our world so that we can take some of that perspective into our own life and what we're going through. So
Absolutely.
I love your story. I love everything you are doing. How do we find your books? How do we follow you? How do we go on this journey with you?
Oh, you can find me at Tinkles Her Pants. That's one you won't forget. Tinkles Her Pants on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, all of the social platforms. I'm working on my first novel now, and I tinklesherpants.com, all the things, and you'll find our family there completely unfiltered.
Oh my goodness. And where did you come up with Tinkles Her Pants?
Oh, so that was it was a little inside joke. To be honest with you, I thought, 5 family members would read this blog. I did not think that we would be sitting here and I'd be introducing myself as Tinkles. But in all fairness, attention, I really live for those moments that make you laugh so hard you leak a little, like when you're with your best friend and you have those belly laughs. But that's not always real life. Real life is hard and it can wreck you, and real life deserves to be done with real people. So Tinkles Her Pants was my attempt to find those real people that really mattered. So here we are, just tinkling, laughing and crying and leaking the truth.
Isn't that funny how just one little phrase like that, and then here you are 5 years, 6 years later saying, hi, I'm Tinkles.
Yes, yeah, but you won't forget it, right?
Oh my goodness. I love it. Well, thank you so much, Stephanie, for joining me and sharing your story and all of your work and your family. What a beautiful message you have.
Thank you so much for having me.
And that's it for today's Intentional Living with Courtney Meyers. Thank you so much for joining us. And thank you, Stephanie Hanrahan, for such a beautiful conversation all about taking those little things that happen in your life, rephrasing them, and really getting truthful about what we are going through. That's how we connect. I always talk about sharing our story helps us connect with others on a real and authentic level. And it allows us to be more free to be ourselves. So thank you for all of your work, Stephanie. I'll put information of how to get in touch with her, follow her, get all of her books in the show notes. And as always, you can find Intentional Living with Courtney Meyers and Intentional Media at CourtneyMyers.com. That's where you'll find our courses, books, and everything else we have coming up. Hope to talk to you soon. Bye.